It's been 3 years since Star Trek Discovery Season 2 aired, which introduced Anson Mounts Pike, Ethan Peck's Mr. Spock, and Rebecca Romijn's Number One. And if you're like me, you've been eagerly awaiting a spin-off series focusing on them. Well, we finally have it, but the question is, was it worth the wait?
The ship is yours, Captain. All right then. Hit it.
Well, it was absolutely worth it. I cannot believe how much I enjoyed this. It really felt like Star Trek had its spirit back. I know a lot of people, plenty of people, have been enjoying the more recent shows. Personally, they've not been for me. They feel like they've been lacking the optimism, and a lot of people have said the optimism and the exploratory vibe that is Star Trek. It's really been gone, but it's finally back. This first episode of Strange New Worlds was incredible. I loved every second of it. We knew the characters would be good, at least I had confidence that they would be from all the trailers. They all have a lot of charisma, they're all interesting people. They all have a ton of personality, and honestly, maybe a little bit too much. But it's only the first episode. I'm sure we'll be exploring a lot more of their backstories, and characters like La'an, who has been given a bit of a difficult position considering that she has Khan's last name. We know that she's somehow related to that dynasty, yet Spock doesn't know anything about the Noonien Singh family in TOS, so that's a little strange, but I'm sure I have faith in the writers that they will iron that out, because one thing that really surprised me in this episode was the way they used Nurse Chapel. They abided by canon, which they've been a little bit afraid to do, it seems, in the past few iterations of Trek. But Chapel is on a special assignment. She isn't actually serving for the Enterprise, which fits in with the canon of TOS, and that gives me a lot of faith in the writers, so I'm happy to have seen that. But the episode itself, the story is very simplistic. It's a first contact story, classic Trek. Basically, Number One, Una, gets held hostage by this group of aliens who have developed warp technology before they really should have, because of repercussions of the final battle in Discovery Season 2, when they set Discovery through the wormhole. And it's a little bit of a stretch that the species was able to reverse engineer warp technology from seeing the battle happen in space. You have to sort of turn a blind eye to that, but it was still a fun sort of story plot. But if you ignore that, the story is very simple and easy to love, classic Trek, and it just works very, very well. But this alien society runs the risk of destroying itself, and Pike gives this great speech at the end referencing the eugenics wars in World War III, saying, we did this similar thing on Earth and nearly destroyed our civilization. You could find peace now and avoid all those things, and that's classic Roddenberry's vision. That's that Star Trek spirit. That's exactly what Discovery's been missing. It's that optimism. It's that we can do the right thing. We can go, beyond our differences. That's the essence of Star Trek. Side note that the ship that Una is commanding is the USS Archer. Nice little callback. Plenty of those throughout the episode, and some people might see them as nostalgia bait. For me, it fits in with the story, and it makes for a nice little callback. Of course, Captain Pike is still dealing with the repercussions of his experience on Borth in Discovery Season 2. He now knows his fate with the extreme radiation that he faces, and ends up in the sort of wheelchair device. And he's sort of taken some time off for himself, is sort of hiding away in Montana in the mountains, when Admiral Robert April appears, who Trek fans will know is a character that we've never actually seen in live action, but until now, which is fantastic. And he's very charismatic as well, even though he has very little screen time, but I'm sure we'll see more of him. He, of course, was Captain Enterprise when it first launched, and Pike served as his first officer on the Enterprise. We see Spock and T'Pring. Very, very nice little callback. T'Pring, of course, being a character in the original series, but she's much more interesting in Strange New Worlds, I have to say. Something I noticed with the Vulcans is that they do a lot of smiling in this new version of Star Trek, which I actually think is good. I mean, especially with Spock, who's, of course, half human. So it makes sense that he's sort of always facing those two sides of himself. And I've said this before, but Ethan Peck is fantastic as Spock. All the characters, or rather all the actors, are incredible. Absolutely fantastic casting. Have no problems with any of them, especially Ethan Peck, who I think is outstanding. Ensign Mount gives a great performance as Pike. He's very charismatic. He's a believable leader. And as far as number one goes, we don't really see much of her in this episode, but I'm craving to see more of her, so that's a good sign. But definitely the most interesting to me is La'an, who gives a really sort of disturbing backstory about her history with the Gorn and how her entire family died. And I'm sure we'll learn a lot more about that in the coming episodes. But most of the other characters didn't really get much time to shine. Ortegas was in very little. Uhura, very, very little, but they all have their little quirky things going on. And Nurse Chapel and Dr. Mbenga got quite a few fun things to do. Nurse Chapel especially. But on the topic of what Chapel and Mbenga did, they had some very interesting things going on with the technology in this episode that they were playing with that we haven't really seen before, but they actually were very clever. Especially with the transporter technology, they were beaming down people and changing their clothes through the transporter, which I think makes total sense. It blows my mind that they've never done that before, but they should have always done that because it makes total sense. However, the beaming of the genome booster into Spock's eye, that's a little bit of a stretch as well. That seems pretty ridiculous. The genome reconfiguration thing as a whole is very interesting, and seems a little extreme to restructure somebody's genome just for an away mission, but I guess you need to do it to blend in. But Spock was obviously experiencing a ton of pain, and that was a fun little moment when he screams and then he looks like himself again. But it was very cool to see, and totally unique to anything we've ever seen before. There are, of course, a few legacy characters sprinkled through here, besides Uhura. We also have Transporter Chief Kyle, who was in the original series, a minor character, but he already seems to be getting more screen time just after the first episode of Strange New Worlds. But we also have, and this is obviously a big spoiler, but at the very end of the episode we're introduced to a Lieutenant Kirk, but not James T. Kirk, Samuel Kirk, Captain Kirk's brother, who was in TOS. Unfortunately, he did meet his end in TOS, but I'm assuming we're going to learn a lot more about him. He was actually in several of the trailers, but nobody seemed to identify him. I certainly didn't, as Samuel Kirk. But they weren't afraid to show him, which was interesting. Some people theorized that he might have been McCoy, but he's not. He's Samuel Kirk, which is very exciting for the future of the series. It's also worth noting that we don't actually meet the character of Hemmer in this episode. He does appear as a sort of teaser at the end, but he, I believe, is going to be the chief engineer. He's an Enar, which is a species from Enterprise, a subspecies of the Andorians, who are blind and telepathic, which is very cool, and the actor Bruce Horrick, who's playing him, is actually legally blind, which is excellent. A fantastic idea to introduce a blind actor into Star Trek. Absolutely love it. But the episode ends with a wrap-up. We have La'an is now part of the crew as opposed to just being a provisional officer. She's now going to be the chief of security, I assume. We get teased with Hemmer, and we get teased with Samuel Kirk, so lots of exciting prospects for the next episode. The score was really great. The music was very classic TOS, almost, and it had that very optimistic feeling, and it fit right in and accompanied the show beautifully. If the next few episodes of the show, and indeed the rest of the season, live up to the quality of this first episode, we are in for a fantastic show, and one that may very well be the best Trek show we've ever seen.